I thought the only thing I had to worry about in the Florida Everglades were the alligators. But the longer I stayed out there, the more I realized the danger wasn't in the water. It was in the things people don't talk about. And once you notice it, it's already too late to pretend you didn't. Before we go any further, subscribe and comment your city. I want to know who's out there listening. Hvcko Capko was 7 years old. He was playing in his grandmother's front yard, and then he was gone. Since 1965, law enforcement agencies in and around the Florida Everglades have recorded more than 175 unsolved homicide cases. That number covers only the bodies that were actually found. It does not account for the people who went into the water and were never recovered, consumed by alligators or bull sharks, or the simple, indifferent weight of the swamp itself before any investigation could begin. The Everglades is widely understood among law enforcement professionals to be one of the most effective locations in the United States for the permanent disposal of evidence. This is not speculation or folklore. It is documented fact. And somewhere at the intersection of that fact and the darkness that this place produces, children have disappeared in ways that have never been explained and never will be. Hvcko Capko was 7 years old on January 10, 2009. He was playing in the front yard of his grandmother's house in Immokalee, Florida, a small agricultural community on the eastern edge of Collier County, close enough to the Everglades that the smell of the swamp moves through on certain mornings like a visitor that doesn't announce itself. His grandmother was inside. The yard was fenced. The neighborhood was familiar. There was no reason on that ordinary Saturday morning to believe that anything would go wrong. And then she looked out the window and the yard was empty. Hvcko was gone. He has never been found. He has never been seen again. As of this recording, his case remains open. He would be in his early 20s now. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody knows what happened to him. There is no answer to give his grandmother, who looked out a window in a fenced yard on an ordinary Saturday and watched her world end without even knowing it yet. Hvcko Capko was a teenager in 1998 when she climbed out of her bedroom window in the middle of the night to go to a party. This is the kind of thing teenagers do. This is the kind of thing that usually ends with them sneaking back in before sunrise, a little disheveled and a little guilty, and entirely fine. Wendy did not come back. She has never been found. There are no solid leads in her case. There is no explanation that accounts for where she went, because between the bedroom window and wherever she was going, there is a gap that no investigation has ever been able to close. In the Everglades region, when a person disappears without a trace, without a witness, without a phone call or a struggle or a single piece of physical evidence, the gap closes in a specific way. The sawgrass closes, the water closes, and whatever happened happens in the permanent dark underneath, where nothing that goes in ever comes back up. Amy Billig was 18 years old in 1974 when she was last seen hitchhiking down a stretch of road in South Florida. Her mother, Susan, spent the rest of her life looking for her. She followed every lead, worked with every investigator, refused for decades to accept that her daughter was gone, because the only alternative to looking was accepting. And accepting meant understanding that something had taken her child, and the swamp, or the road, or the darkness had swallowed whatever came after. Susan Billig died in 2005. She never found her daughter. The case has never been solved. Amy Billig has been missing for over 50 years. These are not unusual stories for the Everglades corridor. They are representative. The Everglades and its surrounding communities have produced missing persons cases at a rate that demographers and law enforcement analysts have noted as statistically anomalous for a region of its population density. Something about this particular geography, the remoteness, the impenetrable terrain, the water that takes and doesn't give back, creates conditions in which people vanish in a way that other places do not produce. There are rational explanations for many of these cases. There are human explanations. The Everglades has always attracted people who are running from something, and it has always attracted the kind of people who prey on those who run. The criminal history of this region is extensive and well documented and deeply dark. But when you stand in the front yard of a fenced house in Hvcko on a January morning and try to understand how a 7-year-old boy playing in that yard could simply cease to exist, when you hold the absence where he used to be and try to fill it with any explanation that makes sense, you find that you cannot. The rational explanations fail. The criminal theories fail. What you are left with is the fundamental and bottomless mystery of a child who was there and then wasn't there, in a region where the water is dark and the grass closes over everything, and the land itself seems to pull things down and keep them. What you are left with is the quiet of an empty front yard, and a grandmother who still doesn't have an answer, and the Everglades, vast and indifferent and silent, keeping whatever it knows to itself in the dark. The guide who took me through the Lostman's River Channel said something I have not been able to let go of. He said the Everglades has a hunger. He did not mean it as poetry. He meant it as a description of something he has observed over 20 years of working these waters. A pattern, a repetition, a particular and specific way that this place tends toward absence. Things go in. They do not come out. Children, men, women, planes, boats. The swamp gathers them and keeps them. And the silence after is total and permanent, and somehow, in a way you cannot quite articulate, satisfied. He said he does not know what it wants. He said he does not want to know. He said some questions are better left at the water's edge, and walked away from while it is still light enough to see the trail home. There is a place in the interior of the Florida Everglades, approximately 3 acres in size, located somewhere south of what is now known as Alligator Alley, that does not appear on any official map, is not accessible by any marked trail, and has not been entered by anyone in recent memory who came out able to accurately describe what they found. The locals call it the Lost City, or sometimes the Ghost Village. It is a place where the vegetation is so thick that you cannot push through it without a machete even in the dry season, where rotting wooden structures, now entirely consumed by roots and vines, suggest that something was once built there, something substantial, something meant to last. Where the ground, when you can find ground at all between the water and the roots, feels wrong underfoot in a way that experienced Everglades guides find difficult to explain. What happened at the Lost City and who built it is a question that has generated competing answers over more than a century. The Seminole people consider the area sacred and decline, generally to discuss it with outsiders. Early settlers in the Everglades spoke of Confederate soldiers who retreated into the swamp after the Civil War, carrying stolen gold, and who were never seen again, killed, according to some tellings, by Seminoles who regarded the incursion into that particular territory as a profound violation. The gold in this version of the story is still there, somewhere under the black water and the roots, undisturbed because the ground that holds it is not a place where anyone with good sense goes looking. During Prohibition, the name most frequently connected to the Lost City was Al Capone. Capone owned a bar on the Tamiami Trail and operated an extensive bootlegging network in South Florida during the 1920s. He needed production facilities that were remote, off-road, and outside the reach of federal agents, and a 3-acre settlement in the interior of the Everglades would have been exactly that. Invisible from the air, inaccessible by road, unreachable except by people who knew the specific route through the sawgrass, which meant only people Capone trusted, which meant very few people at all. Historians have found circumstantial evidence consistent with this theory, but nothing definitive. The vegetation swallowed the evidence, as it swallows everything here, and what remains is a cluster of rotting structures that could be almost anything. What draws serious researchers to the lost city, beyond the treasure legends and the gangster myths, is what the Seminole accounts of the area consistently describe. Not Confederate soldiers, not bootleggers, something older. The Calusa, the ancient tribe that inhabited southern Florida for thousands of years before European contact, a warrior culture so formidable that when the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon made landfall in Florida in 1513, the Calusa drove him off before he could establish a colony. When he returned in 1521, the Calusa drove him off again, and in the fighting, he received a wound that killed him shortly afterward. The Calusa eventually disappeared as a culture in the 18th century, but their shell mounds and burial sites remain throughout the 10,000 Islands region, and some of those sites, according to Seminole oral tradition, contain things that were buried specifically to stay buried. Things that are not artifacts. Things that were put in the ground for reasons of containment rather than preservation. The area around the lost city has produced skunk ape sightings, multiple independent accounts over multiple decades. It has produced reports of sounds at night that do not correspond to any known animal. One documented account from a researcher who approached the edge of the site in the 1990s describes a drop in temperature of approximately 15 degrees over the course of about 20 feet of approach on a hot Florida afternoon, with no rational physical explanation. Another describes a smell, not the sulfur rot smell of the skunk ape, but something chemical, something industrial, something that burned the sinuses and produced immediate nausea at close range. Both researchers retreated. Neither went back. The vegetation has now grown so dense around the lost city that entering it at all would require significant effort, and most likely a guide who knows the approach. The guides who do know the area will not take you there. When asked why, they give different answers. Some say it is protected Seminole cultural ground, and they will not disrespect it. Some say the footing is too dangerous, too much standing water, too many hidden sinkholes. Some of them, the ones who have been out there long enough to speak plainly, just say, no. No explanation. Just no. And that particular quality of no, the no of a person who has been to the edge of a place and understood completely that they will not be going back, tells you more than any answer would. Whatever the lost city is, Confederate hideout, bootlegger distillery, Calusa burial ground, all of the above at once, it represents something that the Everglades produces in abundance, and that the rest of the modern world is increasingly unfamiliar with. A place that has not been cataloged, explained, documented, or tamed. A place that simply exists on its own terms, unreachable and unreadable, keeping its own counsel in the dark at the center of 1.5 million acres of wilderness that would like very much for you to stay away. The swamp makes no promises. The lost city makes none either. They simply sit there together, patient and overgrown, waiting for whoever is foolish enough to push through the last of the sawgrass and find out what is on the other side. You will smell it before you see it. And if it gets close enough to touch you, the Seminole people say, you are already dying. Before I tell you about long ears, I want you to understand something about the geography of fear. Every culture develops monsters that are specific to their landscape. The fears that emerge from a dense, subtropical swamp, where the air never fully cools, and the water is everywhere, and the ground is unreliable, and the wildlife will kill you in a dozen different ways on any given day. Those fears have a specific texture. They are not fears of the dark in a comfortable bedroom. They are fears of the dark in a place where the dark is genuinely, materially, physically dangerous. The Seminole people have lived alongside those dangers for centuries. The things they invented to fear, or the things they witnessed and named, are proportional to where they live. And long ears is one of the oldest and most specific of those fears. Its Seminole name is Hvcko Capko, pronounced Hvcko Capko, and it means simply long ears. It is described in traditional Seminole accounts as a four-footed creature the size of a donkey, with the body of a deer and the head of a wolf. Gray-furred, low to the ground for its size, with a horse's tail dragging behind it, and ears that are long and pointed and constantly moving, oriented toward the sound of whatever it is tracking. It lives in the swampy marshes and dense interior of the Everglades. You will not hear it approach. It is quiet in the way that sick things are quiet. Conserving energy, conserving motion, preserving itself for the moment it needs to be close to you. The only warning you will get is the smell. The smell of long ears is described as a striking, overwhelming, immediately recognizable bad odor. Different accounts offer different comparisons, but they converge on something deeply wrong, something biological and sick and unlike the normal rot smell of swamp vegetation. It is an animal smell, but wrong, a disease smell. And the tradition is explicit about what that smell means. Long ears carries diseases. It is not merely dangerous in the way that a wolf or a bear is dangerous. It is dangerous in the way that a plague vector is dangerous. If it touches you, if it breathes on you, if it gets close enough that the smell is strong rather than faint, you have already been infected. The disease it carries is not named in the traditional accounts. It is described only by its effects: fever, weakness, a progressive deterioration that the medicine people could treat if caught early, but that would become fatal if long ears was close enough to touch. In 1951, in Calumet, Oklahoma, where a portion of the Seminole Nation relocated during the forced removals of the 19th century, a woman named Mrs. Lawrence Laub reported encountering a creature that matched the Hvcko Capko description exactly. She described it as a cross between a wolf and a deer. She threw a stick at it to drive it away. It did not run. It stood and watched her with complete stillness until she retreated into her house. When she told her husband, he told her he had encountered the same creature 2 years earlier in the same area. Neighbors reported unusual tracks around their properties in the following weeks. These reports were collected and documented. They sit in regional folklore archives. Nobody has ever explained them. What makes long ears particularly unsettling from a modern perspective is not the supernatural element, the disease, the contamination, the ancient Seminole fear of contact, but the uncanny valley the description occupies in the natural world. A deer-wolf hybrid, wolf-headed and horse-tailed, the size of a donkey, moving silently through the swamp and smelling of something wrong. This is not a description that fits any known Florida animal. It is also not a description that sounds invented. It sounds like a description of something someone actually saw, recorded in language that tries its best to place what it saw into known categories and fails, because what they saw did not fit any known category. It was wolf, but not wolf. It was deer, but not deer. It was wrong in the specific way that things from the deep Everglades are sometimes wrong. Familiar enough to be recognized as animal, unfamiliar enough to produce that cold drop in the stomach that is the body's way of announcing danger before the mind has fully caught up. There is a Seminole tradition that the best protection against long ears is simply to be aware of it, to know the smell, to know that if you are in the deep swamp and something begins to smell wrong around you, you do not investigate the source of the smell. You move away from it immediately and without hesitation. You do not track it. You do not try to see it. You understand that the smell is both warning and symptom simultaneously, and that the further you are from the source when you recognize it, the better your chances of walking out of the swamp in good health. The tradition is essentially, trust your nose before your eyes, because your nose gets the information first, and the information your nose sends you in that moment is exactly correct. In the Everglades today, in the interior channels, and the Hvcko Islands, and the deep sawgrass plains, where very few people go, and fewer still go twice, the Seminole and Miccosukee people who live along the edges of the park still pass this knowledge down to their children, not as mythology, as information, as practical survival knowledge about a specific place that contains specific dangers, some of which have names and some of which do not, and all of which should be respected with the seriousness that 1.5 million acres of subtropical wilderness demands. Long Ears is out there. The smell tells you it is coming. Whether you choose to believe the tradition or not, that particular piece of advice, if something in the swamp begins to smell wrong, do not go looking for the source, is the kind of advice that, in this particular place, seems very sensible to follow regardless of what you believe is producing the smell. Long before Florida was a state, long before it was a colony, the Calusa ruled the water. They are gone now. But the Seminole say they left something behind. The Calusa people are gone. They vanished from Florida in the 18th century, killed by disease, devastated by warfare, absorbed and displaced, and finally erased from the physical landscape they had occupied for an estimated 12,000 years. When they were here, they were one of the most formidable indigenous cultures in North America. They built islands from shells. They controlled the waters of South Florida with an authority so complete that Spanish colonists spent 200 years trying to establish a foothold on the Florida peninsula and failed, largely because the Calusa would not allow it. Juan Ponce de Leon was mortally wounded by a Calusa arrow in 1521, trying for the second time to land on the coast they protected. He died of the wound. They are gone, the Calusa, but the Seminole people who came after them and inherited the Everglades say they are not entirely gone, say that what they left behind is still here. Say you can feel it in certain places, near the shell mounds, near the water, on certain still nights when the wind drops and the swamp is quiet, and something old and watchful makes itself briefly, unmistakably known. The ancient Calusa shell mounds are scattered throughout the 10,000 islands and the coastal Everglades. Some of them are massive, constructed over thousands of years, by a society that ate shellfish in enormous quantities and used the accumulated shells as building material, creating islands where there was only water before, raising the ground to keep communities above the seasonal flood. These mounds are archaeological sites of enormous significance. They are also, according to Seminole tradition, places that are actively guarded. The ancestors of the Calusa, in this tradition, did not leave when their people left. The spirits of the Calusa dead remain anchored to the shell mounds that their living hands built, and they are not welcoming to intruders. Visitors to the mound sites near Hvcko Island and throughout the 10,000 Islands region have reported over the years an experience that multiple independent accounts describe similarly: a sudden, inexplicable chill, a feeling of being watched by something with great patience and no goodwill, and occasionally whispered sounds at the edge of hearing, not words that can be made out, but clearly voices, clearly deliberate, clearly directed at the person standing on the mound. The guardian spirit of the Everglades, in Seminole lore, takes the form of a black panther. Not the Florida panther, the actual Florida panther, tawny and endangered, which does still live in these swamps in very small numbers. Something else, a spectral black panther, enormous and silent, that appears at the boundaries of Calusa sacred ground to warn away those who should not be there. Multiple accounts from the Seminole tradition and from non-indigenous witnesses describe the same experience: the sudden, visceral certainty that they are being watched by something very large in the cypress tree line, followed by a glimpse, never more than a glimpse, of something black and fluid moving between the trees. No sound, no tracks, no evidence of passage. Just the shape, just for a moment. And then the tree line is empty, and the watching feeling intensifies rather than diminishes, as if the withdrawal of the visible presence is itself a warning of a more serious kind. The Florida Department of State has officially listed multiple shell mound sites in the Everglades region on the National Register of Historic Places and places restrictions on excavation and disturbance of the mounds. These restrictions are based on archaeological law, not on the Seminole tradition of guardianship. But the two sets of protective frameworks converge on the same practical conclusion. Do not disturb these places. Do not remove artifacts. Do not break the surface. Whatever is under the shells and the centuries of accumulated silt, the bones, the ritual objects, the evidence of 12,000 years of continuous human occupation of this land, leave it alone. Let it rest. Let the panther guard it undisturbed in the cypress dark, whether you believe the panther is real or not. In 2002, the body of a 17-year-old girl named Hvcko Capko was found in a canal in the L28 drainage area near the Broward-Collier County line, territory that borders some of the most significant Calusa cultural sites in the region. She had been shot through the chest and placed in a garbage bag. Her killer has never been found. The Everglades accepted her, kept her for a month, and gave her back to the surface caught in the reeds. It does not always give back what it takes. When it does, it is not an act of generosity. It is evidence. And the evidence it keeps, in the dark and the silence under the shell mounds where the Calusa built their world, will never be recovered by any law enforcement agency operating under any existing legal framework. The Calusa held their ground for 12,000 years. Their dead are patient. They will hold it still. The old Seminole chief who told Dave Shealy that the skunk ape was a spirit rather than an animal was speaking from a tradition that draws no firm boundary between the physical and the spiritual in the way that Western European thought does. In the Everglades worldview that the Seminole and before them the Calusa inhabited, a creature does not have to be either real or supernatural. It can be both simultaneously. The black panther that guards the shell mounds can be a ghost, and also, on certain nights, a thing with weight and breath and the warmth of a living predator. The division between those categories is a Western European imposition. The Everglades itself was here before that imposition arrived. It will be here after it is gone. And the things in it, the things with names and the things without, predate every category we have invented to contain them. James Flynn went into the Everglades alone in March 1965. He came out blind in one eye. He left with a story that nobody has ever been able to explain. He is still waiting for someone to tell him the truth. This is the last story. I want to end not with folklore, not with disappearances, not with creatures whose names we debate. I want to end with a man, with a real name, who went into the Everglades on a night in March of 1965 and had an encounter that was documented by a physician, investigated by a physicist from the University of Arizona, and that left physical evidence on his body and on the landscape that no investigator who has looked at this case has ever been able to adequately explain. His name was James Flynn. He was a rancher. He was not, by any available account, a man given to exaggeration or fantasy. And what happened to him in the Everglades changed his life completely and permanently in ways that are still, 60 years later, without a rational explanation. Flynn was in the Everglades in March of 1965, hunting with his dogs in the remote interior, far from any road or settlement. It was evening when he first saw the light, a large, cone-shaped object hovering above the cypress trees in a remote prairie area, making a whirring sound. He described orange-red illumination around its base that cast a glow on the ground for approximately 75 feet in every direction. He watched it from a distance for some time. Then he moved toward it. This is either the bravest or the most inadvisable decision in this story, depending on your disposition. But Flynn was a practical man and a curious one, and he wanted to understand what he was looking at. He approached. He got close. And then something happened. The object emitted something. A force, a beam, a concussive energy. And Flynn was struck between the eyes. A blow he described as a sledgehammer hit. He lost consciousness immediately. He regained consciousness the following morning. He was blind, not dark adapted, not temporarily stunned. Blind. He lay there for hours, alone in the middle of the Everglades, until he recovered partial vision in his left eye. He gathered his dogs. He made his way to the home of Henry Osceola, a Seminole man who lived in the swamp interior, who helped him. Flynn did not reach his own home until Wednesday noon. His wife drove him immediately to an ophthalmologist named Dr. Paul R. Brown, who found Flynn's vision at 20/800 in his right eye and 20/60 in the left. There was a slight bruise over his right eyebrow. The right retina could not be seen at all. Flynn also reported hearing loss and numbness in his arms and hands. These findings were documented in medical records that still exist. On March 26th, Flynn returned to the encounter site with his physician, Dr. Harvey Stipe, who had known him for 25 years, and 2 additional witnesses. They found a burned circle approximately 72 feet across. The circle looked as if it had been swept clean, cleared of all leaves, twigs, and natural debris with the precision of something mechanical. 8 cypress trees in the immediate area had been scorched from their tops down to approximately halfway from the ground. The burn pattern was consistent, radial, and inexplicable in terms of any fire that could have been produced by natural causes or by any human activity those witnesses could identify. Dr. Stipe confirmed the findings. The site was documented. The burned circle existed. The scorched trees existed. Whatever happened there, something physical and forceful and hot had been present at that location in the recent past. In October of 1966, the Arizona physicist James E. McDonald conducted a phone interview with Flynn. Flynn told him that he believed the object was probably a secret aircraft operated by the United States government, and that if he could ever prove that, he expected someone would be held accountable for the loss of his eye. He was measured about it. He was not conspiratorial. He was a man making a practical statement about a practical injury. Something blinded him. The thing that blinded him was not natural, and someone was responsible. McDonald investigated the case and was unable to produce a conventional explanation for the physical evidence. The burned circle, the scorched trees, the specific pattern of Flynn's injuries, which were consistent with exposure to a directed energy source of some kind. He had no conclusion to offer. Flynn made a rare public appearance in 1996 at Port Charlotte, Florida, 31 years after the incident. He said, "I am waiting for the day someone turns up the truth about this thing." He was still waiting. His right eye never fully recovered. The burned circle in the Everglades grew over in the years that followed, the cypress and sawgrass reclaiming it, the way the Everglades reclaims everything. Slowly and completely, and without acknowledgement of what was lost. By now there is no physical evidence remaining at the site. There is only Flynn's testimony, and the medical records, and the physics of a burned circle 72 feet across, with a scorched tree radius that someone swept clean of debris in the middle of the most remote accessible interior of the Florida Everglades in March of 1965, when James Flynn was the only human being for miles. The Everglades does not explain itself. It never has. It held Edgar Watson's body count for decades and gave nothing away. It swallowed Flight 19 and 1,300 square miles of search, could not find a single bolt. It took a 7-year-old boy from a fenced front yard and produced no trace. It blinded a man with something that left a burned circle in a cypress grove and erased the evidence in a decade of vegetation. It keeps what it takes, and it keeps what it sees, and it keeps every secret that has ever been deposited in its dark, tannic, bottomless water, without a single apology and without a single explanation. It is 1.5 million acres. It is the largest subtropical wilderness in North America. It has been here for 10,000 years. And it will be here long after every person who has ever tried to understand it is gone. Long after the last name has been forgotten, long after the last story has been told. It will be here, in the dark and the heat and the silence, keeping everything it has ever been given, still watching, still waiting, still hungry, and still, always, still taking. Whatever is in that swamp, it has never needed our permission. It has never needed our belief. It has never needed us at all. And that, more than the ghost, more than the creature, more than the murderer, more than the things without names that move at the edge of the firelight and are gone before you can be sure, that is the most terrifying thing of all.